Some lessons learned from my recent holiday in Greece. That is going to be the topic of this week's Impactful Teamwork podcast episode because I have just come back from an amazing week of sailing in the Greek islands and it was really magical. It was super hot, over 40 degrees on some days, but it was a great opportunity to rest and relax and recuperate and refocus on the business. But what always amazes me is I can never take the lens of leadership away. And there were so many lessons that I learned whilst I was sailing around the Greek islands about leadership. So I thought today that would be a really apt topic for us to talk about because opportunities for us to learn and develop are everywhere. And as I said, I experienced six or seven, I'm probably going to share with you, leadership lessons whilst I was away on holiday. And I think if we're just always open to it, we can always be continually learning and continually improving by watching what is happening in the environment around us and how other people act and react to situations. So, super powerful. So, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. It was an absolute blast recording this and, importantly, actually going on my holiday and experiencing this, even though sometimes some of the lessons were quite hard to take. So let me start off with the first lesson that I took away from my holiday, which is about the power of sharing leadership. Now, many of you will know that's a topic that I'm really passionate about because that I believe that in today's environment, one leader can't know everything. The old days of the industrial era, when you had a factory owner and they knew everything about the factory and everything about the production plant and everything that went on, those days are just gone, and the advent of the internet and Mr. Google now means that everybody can potentially know anything that they want to know. Leaders in the old days maybe had the upper hand because they had the knowledge. Nowadays, that's no longer the case. So, this is why I'm such a big advocate for shared leadership because there's no way one leader can know everything. And this was really made apparent to me actually the first time we went sailing, but I noticed it again on this particular sailing trip. So this was the third time that I had actually been sailing with my partner. And I hadn't been sailing until a couple of years ago. So this is a pretty new activity for me. But I've always loved the water. I've always loved being out in nature. So it's a really great holiday for me to be out on the water. But when my partner decided that they were going to get a day skipper license so that we could actually go out on a boat. They obviously did a number of exams and navigation exams, and some of those they did here in the UK. But then they needed to do the practical component. And my partner not wanting to go in the kind of end of the winter to the cold Yorkshire coast or Scottish coast to do his actual practical session, decided to go to Greece. And that particular week, I didn't actually have a lot on. So I rather foolishly said, maybe I'll just come along, thinking that he would go out on the boat each day and come back every night. And I'd just be at some nice hotel chilling out by the pool for a week. What a big mistake that was, because actually what happened was I actually ended up going on the boat, doing all the training with my partner and a couple of other people that were doing their exams. And I actually ended up achieving my competent crew certificate for the boats. Wasn't what I had planned. With hindsight, was absolutely the most amazing thing that happened because 6 months after the training, we went out on our first ever flotilla trip, and I'll explain a bit about that in a moment. But thinking back to it, if I had never been on a boat before and didn't know anything about how it operated, and what I needed to do as a crew member, I would have felt massively out of my depth, not very safe and not very secure, particularly with a boat captain, aka a leader, my partner, who was a novice. So for me, going out on that first trip, having actually done the training, a whole week's intensive training on how to put up the sails, take them down, tie off the knots and the lines on the boat, prepare the boat for sailing, all these different tasks I needed to do. If I didn't know any of that, I think I would have felt really out of my depth on that first occasion. But also, more importantly, it would have put so much more pressure on my partner as the boat captain to have to know everything. So that was the power that I learned of shared leadership. If the other person doesn't need to know everything, but they have a different perspective on it. So I was looking at our trip probably a bit more through the lens of safety and security and systems and processes. What did I need to do in order to make the boat safe and secure for us to be on and ready for sailing? Whereas he was more focused on the navigation and how to get us safely from A to B. So a massive power of people being able to share the leadership. And that just became very prevalent. And what's been interesting is, as I said, now this was our third trip, is now my leadership skills have improved. My knowledge has improved. I feel more confident. He's now more confident. And it's interesting that we're on the boat. We generally feel a lot safer. I'm not worried. In the early days, I was worried we were going to capsize the Beneteau 323 that we were sailing. And it's pretty impossible to do that. But the reason that I was concerned about that was my only other experience really of being on sailing boats had been a dinghy holiday. And I had learned on a Nielsen resort how to do dinghy sailing. And the first time I ever went on a boat with my partner was on one of these dinghies. And he said, I'm an expert, I can sail these dinghies. And we went out, it was quite windy, and he capsized the boat 3 times and dropped me in the water. And so it's really interesting how beliefs are shaped very quickly. So I have immediately formed this belief that it wasn't safe to be in a boat with my partner, that he was going to capsize. And I was quite anxious. So, of course, the first time we went out sailing by ourselves, I had that belief and that worry and that concern and that anxiety because of what had happened previously. What I didn't know was, as I said at this point, that these Beneteau 323 boats that we're on, they're pretty unsinkable, right? It's pretty difficult to capsize them. And I now understand how easy it is to capsize a dinghy versus one of these boats that we were on. But really fascinating is another leadership lesson there about the power of beliefs and experiences. And once something's happened to us once, how we think that is going to happen in all the other times that we experience a similar type situation. So that was what was going on for me. And as I said, now we've been on the boat, we've done 3 different boating trips. I was way more confident. So when we were sailing this time and the boat was tilting, I wasn't worried that we were going to capsize like I was. I remember that first time being absolutely terrified the minute the boat keeled in any sort of way that it was going to go over. But now I've spoken to some people, I've got some other advice, I've done a bit of research, and I really do now feel a lot more confident that our probability of capsizing that boat is absolutely minuscule. So I really shouldn't worry. And that's a belief I need to release, right? Because it's no longer serving me. Actually, it was impacting negatively my experience of the holiday because I kept thinking we were going to capsize, and that was something that was never going to happen. Second leadership lesson that I really learned on holiday was about the power of roles, responsibilities, and accountability. Because when you're getting ready to sail and we're ready to leave the port, there are a huge number of jobs that need to get done in order to get the vessel ready. And quite intuitively, we naturally split up everything that needed to get done. So I did a lot of the stuff below deck, making sure all the cabin windows were sealed, all the hatches were down, everything was put away, everything was very secure so that should we get some good wind and we were keeling in the boat and it was tipping over a bit, that nothing would fall off and we wouldn't break anything. I was also responsible for doing all the radio and calling in and letting the captain of the flotilla we were on letting them know that we were leaving port and coming in and all that type of thing. Whereas my partner took much more responsibility for making sure that all the sails were in order, all the lines were in the right place, and all the navigation was set up so that we didn't go and run aground or anything like that. It's incredible when you've got these roles and responsibilities, how people can step in and feel empowered to do what they need to do in order to make the event a success. And that kind of needs some systems and checklists. So when I was doing my competent crew training, I was given a checklist of everything I needed to do to make sure the boat was safe and secure to set sail. In my mind now, I don't need to look at the list anymore. I know, but I know each of the things I need to do in order to make that happen. And so that's the power of systems. When we've got those processes in place, everyone knows what to do and how to do it, then it makes everything pretty effortless. And we can get going quite quickly because everyone's taking their roles and responsibilities appropriately. There was another really interesting thing that I observed in terms of team dynamics, because as I said, when we were on this holiday, we were part of what we call a flotilla. So effectively, what happened was we had our own boat, but we were part of a group of 9 other boats. And we were on effectively what I might want to call an organized trip. So we met up with the other 9 boats, and one of those boats was the boat leader of the whole flotilla, so the flotilla leader, and they had with them a social host and an engineer. And they were in charge of telling us every day that this is the port we're in, and we are going to travel to port B. This is where it is. This is how many nautical miles it is away. This is what the winds are doing. And please make sure that you're at this location by, say, 5 o'clock in the evening. And for us, that was a really great way to experience sailing, but do it in a very safe and secure way. So we talk a lot about psychological safety in the workplace, and this was our psychological safety of the boat. Because what it meant was we had some backup should anything go wrong. As I said, we're quite novice. It's only our 3rd time of sailing. We're not exactly competent at this, but it meant we had a safety net should anything go awry. We were given the directions of where to go, but how we got to point B was entirely up to us. We could go and stop at any of the coves we wanted and have lunch and go swimming, or do more sailing and then sail back to that port B each night, however we wanted to do it. So we had a huge amount of flexibility and autonomy to do what we wanted. But what was great was that we had a very strong support mechanism around us. So in the event that anything happened, we could just call up the flotilla captain and ask for help. And it's a bit like, I describe it like this, having the AA on speed dial, right? So the flotilla captain and crew with her crew and the engineer were available to come out and help us should ever anything go wrong. And in fact, on this particular trip, nothing did. But I remember the first trip that we went on, I was always responsible for putting the anchor down when we were about to get towards a cove where we wanted to stop and maybe have a swim and have lunch. And the anchor comes up really high. And when you want to put the anchor down, you want the anchor to drop immediately. But it often catches on the end of the boat. So what you need to do before you actually get to put the anchor down is almost like tip it over a fulcrum point so that the minute you push down on this automated button that you have, the anchor drops immediately. So we were out, we were approaching this port, and I was at the front of the boat and I pushed the anchor off the edge. But unfortunately, what I didn't realize was that the chain for the anchor had not dropped into the ankle correctly. So I pushed the anchor off the edge of the boat and it jumped off the winch and kept going and going. And I'm pushing this button to try and stop it, and nothing's happening. And the end result was we had 50 foot of anchor hanging off the end of the boat, and it had jumped off the spindle. So we couldn't get it up in any shape or form. And that's when having a safety and support mechanism around you is so important, because they came out from the lead boat, and it must admit it took them about 2 hours and a lot of manpower to actually eventually help us get the anchor up and get it back onto the winch so we could get it back onto the boat. I always think to this day, what would have happened if we hadn't had that and we had just been out there by ourselves? What would we have done? Because we couldn't get the boat into a port because we had this huge anchor waving around that would have got caught on everything as we went in. So this is the power of teams, actually, and having a team around you that can support you when something doesn't work. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And one of the reasons why we continue to go on flotilla holidays like this is because we know that we've got this support mechanism around us. People that we can call on should something not work. And also, they're great because they help give us direction in terms of how to dock the boat. Some of the ports in Greece, as you might imagine, during the summer period, are very busy. But we know that the lead flotilla boat captain is there giving us direction and has saved us a place on the quay and places to anchor up. So really, really useful. But the other thing related to team dynamics is actually the team dynamics of the lead boat. So as I said, there's a boat captain on there. That was a young lady called Anya. We had a social host called Charlotte, and we had an engineer called Josh. And these three people really demonstrated to me the power of teamwork and close collaboration and cooperation. Because what you've got to remember is that these three people are working and living together in the confines of a small boat 24/7 all summer. So getting the dynamics of that team is super, super important. And it was interesting. Charlotte shared with me, she said that they had gone through a number of different iterations of combinations of people until they had managed to get this right combination of Charlotte, Josh, and Anya working together, who worked effectively and seamlessly together. Because as you can imagine, working in those small confines, if somebody doesn't get on with somebody else and the team dynamics are out of sync, then that is catastrophic for everybody, not only for the physical operation of the team, but also for the impact that has on everyone else on the rest of the flotilla would be impacted by the poor dynamics of that team. One of the other big learning lessons for me from this vacation was about the power of planning. Proper planning prevents poor performance. Some phrase you might have heard a number of times, but it really did. And what I realized was that there were a few areas where the power of planning was so important. And the first was obviously in setting up the boat to make sure that we had everything we needed. And we had a big long checklist to make sure we got everything. But also it was in when we wanted to tack when we were sailing. My partner tended to go, she goes, we're just going to change direction now. And I was going, whoa, what does that mean? What do I need to do? And actually, when we started breaking it down and we're like, okay, what the first job we're going to do is we're going to bring in the mainsail. And the second job we're going to do is we're going to bring in the jib. And this is how we're going to do it. And actually, when we talked that through and we knew exactly what was going to happen, then when we went to actually execute, we were way more successful because we were both absolutely clear on what was going to happen. And it made me think how often in business, where we're quite quick to jump in and do something without actually planning what needs to happen effectively. And indeed, actually, this was just a topic of a conversation I had with a coaching client this morning, where they've got a lot of deadlines. As we often see in business, companies and teams firefighting just to get things done. And sometimes the thought of stopping and planning seems counterintuitive. But I can assure you, and definitely this was the case on our holiday, that every time we planned and we were very clear on what needed to happen, we were able to execute a lot more effectively. So I think there's a great leadership lesson there about the power of slowing down, stopping, and planning means that the execution is a lot more effective, a lot more seamless, and generally gets the results you want rather than the results that we didn't want. The other thing I noticed was when we didn't plan, what tended to happen was then my partner would get quite anxious, get really frenetic. His energy, Julia, do this, do that. And actually, what that did was that just confused me. And I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. Am I doing this? Am I doing that? And I think, again, we see this a lot in business where when leaders get anxious that we're not getting the results we want, we're getting under pressure, their energy gets quite dysfunctional. A lot of you will know that I talk about it a bit like a sparkler on fireworks day. Something's going all over the place and there's no direction to it. The energy is really scattered. And I really experienced that the challenge when that energy is really fragmented and scattered. how then it changes the energy of the people that you're with and makes them in that confused, scattered state. And then nobody can achieve anything. And you can really see how something could go quite massively out of control when that happens. And I was really fortunate, actually. One of the other people on my holiday was a Navy captain. He'd been 35 years in the Navy, and I had a long conversation with him about energy. And he was telling me, and he's commanded a number of warships for the Navy around the world, and some of them in combat zones. And we were talking about how it's so important that a leader can moderate their energy in times of crisis. A leader actually needs to be able to control their energy and not get caught up in the frenetic chaos going around them, because that's what kind of grounds and anchors everything. If the leader can stay grounded and anchored, then everyone else can stay level around them. But as I experienced when my partner got quite chaotic and frantic and wasn't that kind of anchor of support, then everything else went awry around us on the boat. Finally, the other really important lesson that I learned on holiday was how we can get so fixated on the result that we forget to look around us. So there were a number of times when I was actually steering the boat when we were out. And in order to make sure that we were staying on the right course, I'd often pick a point on the horizon and know that I had to keep the boat heading that way. And that worked really well for me until it didn't, right? Because what I realized was I was often so fixated on where I was heading that I was going along and I was like blinkered, right? I didn't really see everything else, including not seeing the ferry that was coming in quite rapidly from my port side one day. And again, that was such a great analogy for me of what happens in business when we can get so caught up in the goal, the destination, where we want to get to, what's happening, but we forget to take the blinkers off and see everything else that's happening around us. Because unless my partner had been there and was actually paying attention to what was going on around us in the environment, there was the danger that me and the ferry could have ended up in a nasty collision. So we see this in business a lot, with business leaders not really recognizing and seeing what's happening in the landscape around them. And this is why we've seen companies in the past fall into demise, because they haven't recognized the changing conditions around them. They've been so focused on where they're going that they haven't seen the changing landscape. And this is something with the advent of more technology, more AI around us. Things are changing at a rapid speed. And as leaders, we have to have this amazing periphery vision to see everything going on around us and really pay attention to where we are placing our attention as we're going through our day to day. So, with that in mind, actually, I am running a webinar on August 12th, one of our 20-minute teachings. It's called From Busy to Brilliant: How Strategic Attention Fuels High Performance Teams. So, taking some of these lessons, and particularly that one that I just shared about leaders often getting blinded by everything around them, how we can really use the power of attention and where we place our attention to accelerate business performance. So I hope you've enjoyed some of these nuggets that I took away from my holiday in Greece. It was very relaxing. I hope many of you get an opportunity to get a break over this summer period. Take that opportunity to rest and recalibrate and reset and come back motivated, engaged, and just with a renewed sense of vigor and purpose. I know that I've got that, and I wish that for you too. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Impactful Teamwork, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Okay, bye-bye.